Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of What We Should Know, coming to you from Cambridge Community Television. Paul Stephen is here. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, as always.
We have a lively discussion planned for today. Let's see if something actually develops out of that. Paul and I were speaking during the preparation time for the show about his arrival in Boston, Massachusetts as a 19-year-old?
As a 19-year-old in 1965. Right, 19 years old.
A wild time, 1965.
Well, I was actually the end of the conservative era. When I left college, the fraternity I was in, nobody smoked dope. Everybody got drunk every night, every party night, weekend night. And then as I came back from basic training and the Vietnam War was going on then, the entire place had changed. Everybody was smoking pot, and the house mother was getting drunk. It's so funny. We had a very sort of nice gray-haired lady who was seemingly uncorrupted when I left, and I came back the next year and she was totally she was a drunk. So times were falling apart then as the culture was trying to reinvent itself in the midst of that war. That war just absolutely tore the country apart.
It did.
So, and more so than what's happening now, I think. Because the truth of the matter was we had the draft then, which in retrospect I think was a pretty good thing, because you don't go to war so easily when you have everybody's children. And if it's done fairly, the rich and poor are also serving. But now they're basically, there's a warrior class that they pay to have on full time, and they'll sacrifice those people for anything. Anything that seems to suit their purpose.
Well, I'm not sure. I appreciate exactly your appreciation of the Democratic end of the draft, that theoretically every class would be, pulled into the military and to serve. But we know about the exemptions from politicians and from the wealthy.
No, you have to make it work, absolutely.
Sure.
And that's what I'm talking about. If the system doesn't work fairly, then you're just doing what you're doing now. Now you're just paying for your victims. Then you're just picking and choosing your victims. The system needs to have the people invested in it, and it's not going to happen without a draft. And that's the only reason why a politician would think twice about going to war. Because right now, we're invincible, at least in the short term. We can't win a war to save ourselves. But we can go in and we can totally mess up a country and its population in no time. So.
And we do.
And we do. And we do. And we don't seem to accept the fact that we're no longer, G.I. Joe stands for good intentioned Joe, and we're no longer the good intentioned American. We're just not. Everything we're doing, we're either furthering our ambitions for power and hegemony,
Plunder.
or for oil and plunder. And it's we've lost our sense of direction, clearly. And that's why I was saying earlier that Trump's, whose sense of direction is not at all in agreement with mine, but his meeting with the Democrats and doing a deal which undermines the Republicans considerably. So they're suddenly having to scramble to meet his needs in order to keep him from making more deals with Democrats. But it's an interesting sort of dynamic that was unleashed, and it makes me hopeful. Because nobody is going to change the system from within. You have to be an outsider coming in and saying this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, and not have the debts to all the political elements that a candidate usually has. Barack Obama disappointed in a lot of ways, I think, because he had certain commitments, especially in the second term where he was heading for his retirement. So, anywho, I'm not quite sure how I got there, but I got
No,
there.
Paul, I find it incredibly interesting because everybody is asking themselves what's going on in Washington, what theory is being followed, and something that's always interested me is the theory of fascism. Breitbart News and the radical right wing of the Republican Party and their neo-Nazi tendencies has not led, I don't believe, to a reworking of a theoretical basis of what actually drives fascist movements. And the Germans have come up, or came up many years ago, in the 1960s, I believe, mid-60s, about the same time you came to Boston.
Mm-hmm. It would be.
They came up with a theory out of Frankfurt University, the School of Social Theory, that because fascism is a development out of capitalism and not out of socialism, the fascist movement is pushed and generated by the capitalist class to defend their control of the economy at a time in which the profit structure is falling, to defend their profitability, to gain a more powerful grip on the working class. That's the theory.
Yeah, no, and I think the theory is correct. I think the thing that has to always be factored in is capitalism is not a bad system. It's a good system. It motivates and it reinforces by positive rewards itself. So it has a great positive side. The problem is when it gets taken beyond where it should be taken, when people start to prey on people rather than sell them goods. And that's why it has to be regulated. If it's not regulated, it's only going to end up for the benefit of whoever's getting the biggest slice of pie. Socialism, you're absolutely right. Socialism will not breed this kind of selfishness and avarice, and it breeds a concern for the other person that capitalism just doesn't. So I think a mixture of socialism and capitalism is not a bad thing, which the Chinese have sort of discovered themselves, because capitalism thrives in China now, and it's become a real big driver. Not to the good of the people necessarily, because land becomes valuable and basically it can be stolen so easily because you have the Communist Party, one party rule and control. But what's happening now is that things have value they never had before, and the people that are amassing the most money will get the biggest part of those things that have value, like every capitalist society. And if it's not regulated for the good of the little person, to protect them, then you have it running amok, and it's becoming what we're living in now. We're just, when you're in the middle of it, you don't quite see that you're abandoning one position to go to another because you're in the middle of that shift. But we're really in the middle of it, and there's not enough to go around because some people are siphoning off so much.
Wow.
I think that's what's happening.
I think you're right, yeah. Paul, that's interesting. If a few have vast wealth, there has to be a multitude with very little.
Right? Especially, wealth has incredible power by itself. So if you use that immense, vast wealth to amass wealth, it's going to suck it out of anywhere that it's hidden. It'll suck it out of the pockets of the little guy. That's what's ultimately going to happen, out of the paychecks and the pockets of the little guy. And our society is not built on that. It's changing to that, and here again you're seeing the shift, I think.
Piketty came up with a book, Capitalism in the 21st Century.
Right.
And his research showed that the development of wealth being concentrated in the hands of very few is a danger to democratic societies, if one would call the U.S. still a democratic society.
Good question. It's certainly a society in which its people believe they're living in a democratic society. And that's an interesting way to put it, because it means that they may be looking at something that's a total false god. You know, it's a shadow on the wall, like Plato's shadow theory. When people live in a cave and all they see is the shadows on
Right.
the wall, that's all the world is shadows that move and have some sort of life, but they can't quite discern what it is. Whereas somebody turns around, they'll see people walking in front of the cave. But people don't generally turn around. So,
Yeah, the problem, again, is with the media and with the difficulty that so many of us have to get access to accurate news, thorough news, good,
honest news. That's not
unblemished, balanced news,
that
right?
isn't trying to feed you a point of view
Right,
that you don't need to be fed. That's you have no interest in being fed.
right.
A good example is Standing Rock. The media almost totally ignored this major story of these protesters valiantly standing up to the forces of greed and avarice, and who have no concern about the ecology. And it was a wonderful story. There were people that were set upon with attack dogs. There were people that were fired on with rubber bullets. And there were people that were in the middle of a pond and had freezing water poured on them. It's just harsh people. And the media chose, because it's all corporate interests. It's not anything that supports the little guy. The media chose to ignore it, essentially, like they ignored Bernie's Hillary's theft of the nomination.
Wow.
And they're still ignoring it. There's a case in federal court now. The folks down in Florida, I can't remember their names, have this case that's being decided on as to whether or not it's valid from this point on. I have no idea why. But they've already had the Democratic National Committee, the lawyers, saying that they weren't obligated to be fair and impartial. If they chose to go in the back room and decide who won the nomination, they could do that. They had the right to do that. So that's part of their
Wow.
defense. So they've already admitted that. Does the newspaper pick that up and make a big deal out of it? No. Democratic Party admits it's a fraud. So nothing is said about it. It doesn't exist. That's exactly how the news gets distorted and spoon-fed to us.
I have to admit, I'm sick. Why would I be possibly laughing at that? Why would I find something like that?
Because
funny?
it's
Because
so
it's macabre.
weird.
It's
Yes.
macabre.
It is macabre. It is macabre.
It's weird, and it's a reality.
And that's the state we're in. We're thinking that we're still living in this democratic place where people have
Bastion.
values and everything like that, and our wars are all to protect people from being hurt, and it's all bullshit. And we have our perception hasn't caught up with our ideals, because our perception would lag far behind our ideals, and we'd all be sort of shaking our head. How the fuck did this happen? So we're just still somehow or other living in the past.
Will there be time enough to wake up, and what movements, what could possibly generate that? And I believe you mentioned the pivot that Donald Trump is making to the Democrats gives hope to an idea that change, not planned perhaps, not intended, but change could be implemented through his effort.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's one. I mean, if you talk about characteristics of leaders, for unpredictability to be his primary characteristic is very interesting. Because maybe this guy is nuts enough to drop a nuclear bomb on North Korea and really ruin things for everybody. Or maybe he's just nuts to, send a 500-ton bomb buster to overseas just to break up the tunnels and kill lots of Taliban and things of that sort. They just don't know what he's going to do. So for him, he's made it, and that's part of his strength as a negotiator. If you're
The deal maker.
Yeah, because what you have with North Korea is somebody that won't listen and act responsible. And if you say to them, if you don't listen, you're going to pay a big price, and you convince them they have to pay that price. I think it's like a bully. Once you stand up to a bully, he stands down. And they've been a bully. They've been this little fucking bully, and they've agreed to things. And we've given them grain and money, and it's always been to get the short-term payoff from us. And then they say, they cock a snoot at us. So in some ways, with Trump dealing with this guy, you got two kids with nuclear weapons, and it's very scary. But at the same time, maybe we're not going to kick this can down the road. Maybe somebody's going to finally deal with it. Some problems aren't easy. You just have to deal with them. So, I don't know. And I would much prefer somebody that was a little bit more level-headed, less egotistical, to be making decisions like that. That's the problem. He's so unpredictable that it makes me nervous. He may have absolutely no good rationale for doing what he's doing and still do it. You just can't tell. Isn't this a funny thing to see on the streets of Cambridge? Public works guys picking up bales of hay. Well, I'm just going to point.
Yes, it's
3 bales of hay that were sitting on the side of the road, and they came to pick it up. It's so funny. I wonder if there's a horse somewhere that's hungry.
We can't get our camera basically in that angle, but it is Cambridge Works.
Yeah.
Picking up hay. Maybe there was.
It's one of the best logos I've ever seen designed. I love
the Works.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
As an ad man, that's.
I remember when it was first. It won some award, but it was also suddenly appearing in all the trucks and everything. And as an ad guy, absolutely, I loved it because it created a handle for the whole department to use that made it likable and approachable.
The Works.
Yeah, it's dealing with the works. It's not the Department of Public Works. It's just sort of this edifice that's distant. And, maybe their phone works, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe their person answering will be in a good mood, or maybe she won't. That kind of thing.
As an ad man, let's talk about the ad man writing fiction. How is your second novel coming along?
Oh, thank you for asking. It's coming along very well. I would say the story is written, and I know who did it, but I have to figure out, or maybe it's going to happen in the writing, that I'll make it believable who did it, as opposed to that's silly, because that's the problem. That's the issue that I'm dealing with in my denouement.
That's French. Please tell us what that is.
Oh, that means for the grand finale kind of thing.
Oh.
Denouement. And there's going to be a murder, but who does it is going to be a surprise. And I have to go back and put enough
leads, facts, foreshadowing.
Yeah, attitudinal things. So, but I've been struggling with how to make it believable. And so I'm still struggling with it, but I think at the same time I could sit down to write, and I think it would come to it. So it's a fascinating process.
It really, I bet it's all absorbing.
Well, what happens for the first, let's say 150 pages, you don't know where you're going.
Is that true?
Oh yeah. You know some of it, and some of it comes out in spite of yourself, because you don't really know that you know it. Because
you're dealing with your own creative process, with your creative energies?
Well, because I did not sit down knowing, I didn't outline the story or create a framework for it. Some parts of it somehow I instinctively knew. And so what you do is you take what you instinctively know, you suddenly come across ideas that come at you when you're doing it, and you put them down. And some of them are not very interesting. Some of them don't take you to places that you think you need to go to. And so you start to cull those out, but hopefully you've created enough pages that culling those out gives you enough of a solid in a core of the story to build on, and it usually does. And so essentially, you're building each floor by itself in some sense, and then you're putting another floor on top. And now, at the end, the big change for me, and I hope this is interesting to you folks.
I'm sure it is.
I hope.
Paul, I'm sure it is.
The big change for me was learning to accept that the story was going somewhere. I didn't need to know where. But once I had a sense of what the ending was, then from the beginning to the end, there's a lot to fill in. And if you know where the story's going, you can pretty much fill in.
Sure.
So and from that point on, I was always, I always had plenty to do when I sat down to work on the story.
A life of its own. That sounds like such a bon mot, floskel, just a fixed idea that is put out by the press or something like that. But it's true. It has a life of its own, a story.
I believe it does. I believe a good story is something that we enable or give birth to. I don't think it's anything. Where do I have in my mind or my apparatus the story making segment of me? I don't plot very well. Things come to me and I sort of follow them blindly. But in my first novel, I wrote what I thought was the first draft of my novel, and then I suddenly decided that it needed to be built out dramatically. And the next part of it was creating layers, so it was really kind of an interesting, I could never create a plot like that, but circumstantially I ended up creating a plot. Some stuff came in on its own when I was writing, when I went back to rewrite the first draft, and I said, oh, that's interesting, why don't I go with that? And I did. This whole business of the Seekers for Truth, which is an organization that the character in my first novel and the character in the one that I'm writing now, they both belong to the Seekers for Truth. And the Seekers for Truth is a school of self-development meant to, we were talking about Timothy Leary and Ram Dass.
Wow, thank you so much for bringing that.
But the school of self-development is meant to really kind of disseminate to Western students with who are ready to receive spiritual enlightenment of sorts. And because this knowledge doesn't have any interest to somebody that's only interested in the physical plane, in satisfying desires and getting meals, stuffed down his throat. So this attracts a different type of seeker, the people that go to the Seekers for Truth. So it's nice. My next book would be a prequel to these books about the Seekers for Truth, which I'm anticipating.
Wow.
So you wanted to talk about Ram Dass and...
I did. I think many of our viewers, or at least a portion of our viewers, would be interested about the historical development of Timothy Leary and the Harvard. What would they be? Radical intellectual fringe or something like that?
Well, they just happened to get into an area that made them that. But beyond that, they both had individual. This is a great example of somebody standing up to society, to the government, thinking that there were certain rights that he had, and they both sort of had this. They both got bounced out of Harvard for their psilocybin studies and for the LSD studies.
But he was a professor, wasn't he, or an assistant?
They were both
professors.
Well, he was a professor, and he had a professor with an unlimited kind of research opportunity. And
Timothy
Leary, and Ram Dass was an assistant professor to begin with. He was also, one of these bright children. He was a prodigy of sorts. He was just very smart, and he was gay. So I guess Timothy Leary became kind of a father figure to him, and they got into this psilocybin studies and just trying to find the doors of consciousness and where they led, and I think they had a pretty scientifically appropriate approach to all this. They weren't just handing out drugs to people; they were studying them and they were writing up the study, and there were certain effects that were noted. And it doesn't, just because you're afraid of the youth getting this product doesn't mean that you shouldn't study it and learn about it.
Sure.
So, but I kind of felt reinforced in my realization that I need to allow myself to be myself. That if people don't like what I have to say, that doesn't mean I shouldn't say it, or I shouldn't say it. Maybe I should say it in a different way, but I had a hard time when people started to react negatively to my blog because they didn't want to hear me talking about Hillary stealing the nomination and stuff like that. And I certainly understood that there comes a time when it would be appropriate to move on, but I had trouble, I wasn't ready to move on. And so I got all this negative feedback, because the reality was, I also, at the same time that Hillary's business with us was so tawdry, the media's business with Hillary was just as tawdry, and that's another thing that I couldn't let go of. And it's still the same, as we discussed right now, the Democratic Party is being sued for being fraudulent in that last election. And their lawyers maintained that they had a right to have backroom deals and determine the results of an election on their own if they chose to. So the judge has got to decide that there's enough of a complaint to go forward. But the papers don't report on it. They just don't want people to even be aware of what this crap was. You know, and their terrible role. I mean, the thing that the papers should be involved, well, media should be embarrassed about, is their role. They're
Embarrassed.
So complicit. Yeah, they're so complicit in all this. And when Sean Hannity, who I don't normally like, at Fox News, starts to ask questions about Seth Rich, the entire establishment falls on him like a ton of bricks.
Seth Rich, a reporter that was killed?
No, a Democratic DNC worker who was probably the one who leaked the DNC emails to WikiLeaks. He was shot in the back, 3 bullets, in Washington.
And
people think very strongly that it was the Democratic Party, because the guy had gone and stole their emails and leaked them. Who knows what he had left to leak, you know?
And the police are not following this? They're not,
It's one of those mysteries that don't seem to get followed up or resolved.
Assassination again.
It was assassination, but it's assassination seemingly by the one party that had the most reason to do that. They left his wallet
Had a motive.
and his watch, but the one party that had the most motive to do it was the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party won't hand over their servers to the FBI. The Democratic Party has become obstructionist in terms of all this election stuff and all the Russian hack business, because they won't turn over their server so that the FBI can look at it.
So, maybe we could look just for a minute or two, because you've uncovered something really interesting, the Democratic Party as obstructionist. So we now have a pivot of a Republican president to the Democratic Party, because he ostensibly cannot get any of his ideas through Congress due to the Democrats blocking very effectively, apparently, his efforts.
But he had the votes. They couldn't get the votes for the healthcare business because it was too unpopular what he offered. And he couldn't offer that and get the Democrats behind it, but they could come up with something for the healthcare to fix Obamacare together if Trump chose to work with them. It's always interesting. It's nice to see compromise kind of creep back into the political process. So
It's nice to see the do-nothing, the know-nothing party that's been in Washington now, both the Democrat and the Republicans, for an eternity now, actually getting something done through or with the ideas generated by a Republican iconoclast. What would you say? How would you determine what Donald Trump actually is?
Iconoclast is somewhat good. He is somebody that breaks the idols and doesn't go by the path that had already been carved ahead of him if he doesn't want to. Sometimes he will, but he feels very much free to act out. And scary to have in a president, but you'd like to see somebody a little more conciliatory. You know, I go back to Standing Rock. The thing that, and I'm sorry for jumping back.
No, go, please.
But the thing about it that was so outrageous to me was Obama. You know, these people were being attacked by dogs, and he didn't send anybody in to stop
He
them.
never saw Selma. He didn't see the
He never protected them.
Well,
And you're right, he didn't see the parallels. He didn't see that Indians were being treated like blacks used to be treated. But he was such a phony. He just made this executive order that could be rescinded first day of Trump's, ascension, and convinced himself that that was all he had to do.
So, thank you for that. There has been some speculation of why Obama did not act more forcefully in reference to, as the first black president, to put through some effective legislation protecting minorities. The fear factor is one thing that has been mentioned, that he was fearful of his family, of himself perhaps, and found or thought that his effectiveness could be as more of a moderating force as black president. Would you be willing to speculate on that? Or to evaluate
Yes.
his contribution?
I think his contribution, the biggest aspect of his contribution is the symbolism, the symbology of a black, very educated and very sophisticated black man becoming president of the United States. I think it was a little bit before its time, or maybe not. We were all ready for it, but the system itself wasn't ready for it and didn't react very well to it. I think he abandoned principle much too readily, and I don't understand it all. Was it corporate interests? Did they finally get to him? Was it fear? It's a good point. I know that he once told somebody that if he did something, he'd end up like Kennedy. So he didn't feel protected entirely in the office.
No, I agree. The President of the United States is not protected.
Yeah.
Definitely not. There are forces in the United States strong enough. And the assassination of not only John F. Kennedy, but Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, the Black Panthers, numerous Black Panthers, and Seth Rich, most recently. I seriously do not believe, and I want to say this looking into the camera, I do not believe that anyone in the United States is safe, anyone at all, except billionaire class.
But fortunately, this is not like Ethiopia, where rule has kind of broken down, or one of
That's
those
true.
countries over there. No, that's not. Ethiopia wasn't the country. What's the one that has Mogadishu?
I think it's Eritrea.
Is it Eritrea? But there's
Somalia.
Somalia.
Thank you.
That's where the warlords. You need to have strong people.
Right,
so
right.
Warlords come into being.
And Mogadishu is really interesting because of excuse me for jumping back on this. Mogadishu is interesting because of left-wing German groups who demanded that certain members of their group be flown out of Germany and landing in Mogadishu.
You mean they were refugees? They wanted to go home?
Well, they were interested in getting asylum there.
Oh.
And the plane was stormed by.
So they took over. They hijacked the plane.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And the members of their party were killed. Mogadishu. That was the first time that name became prominent, I believe, in. But the lawlessness that has developed in various nations throughout the world is it's a frightening development.
Yeah, and I think if you look at most of the weapons, I think they were supplied by us or the Russians. It's ridiculous. We had
The Kalashnikov, very dependable.
We made a legacy of violence for ourselves. This is what we've created for ourselves. And going back into Iraq unleashed the devil, really did. It's been a disaster ever since. And we had no reason for going into Iraq, as it turned out.
Well, we do geopolitically, we do have a reason, and the reason, I believe, Paul, is the unending interest of the U.S. State Department and the military to have a war with Iran. That's a highly sophisticated nation, highly educated, a very high standard of living, and because they tested for the for an atomic bomb, they are now on target to be the next, if North Korea doesn't become
Step in front in the line. Step into the line.
right, burst forward and take its place. And there's a reason why Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, all are pivoted directly around Iran.
Mm-hmm.
There could be armies launched from any of those nations directly into Iran, and that's why Syria, the war in Syria, is so important to the Iranians, because it creates a buffer zone.
Mm-hmm.
It, from one angle, creates a buffer zone. But this is, I believe, the one justification for the leftist theory of capitalism, that wars will be launched and geostrategic positions planned in the long run, so that when it becomes essential then to take over certain nations through right-wing movements, that will be possible. And that's, I wanted to come back again to Donald Trump's very interesting pivot to the Democrats, who do not really have a very positive image in either my estimate of what they do or yours.
But they're fighting to regain it, and they're not going to be successful, because the truth of the matter is they're still corporatists. They're still going to take money from the powers that be. But, you know, Bernie Sanders putting out the one-payer Medicare for all bill,
Brilliant.
gave them something to put as their vanguard. This is us as progressives. So where that ends up, I have no idea. But I don't. These are the same guys playing the same games that when they had Hillary in their pocket. But I think one of the things that gets overlooked in this recent negotiations, Trump with the Democrats, is that Schumer is a New Yorker, and Trump is a New Yorker.
Oh my God.
And I think there's a real kind of cultural
Empire state monopoly or something like
well,
that?
I think a cultural comfort. I think Trump.
I like that.
Trump doesn't care for McConnell at all. I mean, McConnell is not anybody you would want to certainly invite for bridge, and you'd have to look across the table for 3 hours. And Ryan.
Mitch McConnell, you mean?
Mitch McConnell, yes.
The
Republican
what is he?
leader of the
Leader
Senate,
of the House of
Senate,
Representatives?
Yeah, the Senate Majority Leader, I guess.
Right.
And then and Paul Ryan is kind of a Midwestern
Foreign.
snoot. Yeah, but he seems kind of like a prissy Midwesterner.
Right.
You
He
know.
looks that way too, doesn't
Yeah,
he?
yeah, like somebody, shorted him on the silo count or something. I'll get my dad in here. He's gonna count every goddamn kernel of corn. So I don't think Trump is comfortable with them, and I mean, this is just
But he wouldn't-
me kind of just playing with it. I just
Why
think
not?
Trump is that kind of creature that, they had Schumer and Pelosi over when they were having their discussions. They sent out for Chinese food. That is so
That's
New
so
York.
New York, is it?
Yeah, they sent out for Chinese food.
Do you have a relationship with New York? Is that in
Well,
your
that's where I
background?
grew up, yeah.
It's where you grew up.
Yeah, I moved out of New York to here when I was 19.
And you mentioned it was so provincial when you came to
Yeah.
Boston. Would you
Yeah.
enumerate on that?
Well, you know, Boston used to change slowly. I mean, there wasn't the kind of money there is now. That's one of the things. And money really can change things rapidly. If you look at what's happened in Cambridge is
Oh, wow, right across the
unrecognized-
street.
yeah, unrecognizable. And Boston, it seems to me as though I go to a neighborhood or a section of Boston that I've been in maybe a year ago, and it's different. There are new homes, there are new towers, there are new. The neighborhoods have changed so rapidly. That's and I don't think for the better, quite honestly. And then that Seaport district, which I think was a good idea on paper, it's kind of you can't get in and out without having to deal with gridlock, either cars or the Silver Line, which used to be a dream, traveling Silver Line
Wow,
to the
it
airport,
was.
is always jammed. It's got more people than it can handle. So there have been some sort of lapses in planning, I think, that accompanied this kind of sudden growth.
A tunnel, and a tunnel to the seaport now? Is that?
There is the Ted Williams kind of goes there, but that would be another tunnel would be something. They haven't figured it out yet. I don't think. I haven't heard that they have. I don't.
Do you think
close follow
GE
it.
would finance it?
I think GE, they've gotten in bed with us, and I think they're trying to figure out where they're going to get the quilts that they need, and the pillows. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what we get from GE and what GE gets from us.
Well, how many tens of millions of dollars did they? 153, or was it more than that? $1 million in tax rebates, write-offs, real estate deals, low rent, whatever it is.
Yeah, and think about it. That's a hell of a lot of money to suddenly, in some sense, you're kind of being given it, and so there's a good incentive to move. And you pay for the move as a business expense, so it isn't as though you're spending a lot of your profits. I think it's interesting. I think it also speaks to how loyal they are to anybody. So 10 or 20 years, maybe they'll decide to go somewhere else. Someone makes a better offer.
Yeah.
I always regarded somebody that cheated as somebody that you could expect to cheat.
Yeah.
So
If they have a history of doing that.
yeah, and a big set of never mind.
You use a Spanish term for that?
Yeah.
So why don't we just look at the history of what the Democratic or the Republican Party has done to project what they'll be doing now with Donald Trump as a catalyst.
Well, you're taking a very optimistic look at it. I think what will happen is Trump will have proven to the Republicans that he doesn't need them, and they will become a lot more docile in their dealings with him.
Wow.
So if that happens,
Let me just call it, ladies and gentlemen, this was heard here on this show, What We
Right.
Should Know,
right?
on the 18th of September 2017, Paul Stevenstone.
Well, this is just human nature. Trump will basically manage things to get the end result that he wants. And if he can get it from his own people who have a majority in Congress, he's going to go there. Even if he likes Chuck Schumer, even if they get Chinese food together, I think he'll leave Chuck in the dust in the rearview mirror. But time will tell.
He's an opportunist.
He is an opportunist. And to some extent, that's not a bad thing.
No?
I mean,
If you're a businessman, it's certainly not a bad thing.
Obama never cracked.
If you're a priest, it's not really so good, but
Yeah, right. But Obama never cracked the code. He never figured out how to deal with these recalcitrant Republicans. And maybe if he'd given them a little more of what they wanted. I remember him once saying, people tell me to go have a drink with Mitch McConnell. And I say to them, you have a drink with Mitch McConnell. I don't want to. So
yeah, but there's a difference. He has basically the role and the responsibility to have a drink with Mitch McConnell,
it
right?
might have made life a lot easier for him and for all of us.
He wanted to make a joke. He was a jokester, right?
Who? Obama?
Obama. He made a joke. He made a joke there instead
Oh, of course. Yeah, that was a joke.
instead of actually, recognizing wow, yeah, now
You're right.
that's something I should do.
You're right. He basically had decided that he had no interest
He's
in.
he's
Yeah.
proud.
Yeah.
He's an intellectually superior, proud, and in effect, a poor politician.
Yeah, well, he wasn't a politician very long, so he didn't have a chance to really learn how to. And by the time he got to the Senate, nobody cut deals with anybody, hardly worth it all. So he got skyrocketed. So he suffered from having that instant celebrity. When from the moment he made that speech at a Democratic convention, and I remember I saw that when I was watching the NewsHour on PBS. And they had Shields and I think it might have been Shields and Gigot, but it might have been a fellow that's there now, David. Who's the guy on PBS?
Don't know his name.
Anyway, Shields was astounded. He was absolutely flummoxed by Obama's speech, and he said he predicted that Obama would be president. I remember that. And I thought, my goodness, that's an audacious thing to say.
Of course.
And it turned out to be incredibly prescient. It's what happened. That was a very big moment for Obama. He really rose to that occasion. He was always a great speech maker.
Great black man.
Yeah.
Cassius Clay.
Yeah, absolutely. Another man who had the courage to stand up and,
Who really had the courage.
lived his convictions. Yes, I admire him so much. And I was one of the people that thought he was a traitor and all that stuff. I got sold the Vietnam War when I was young. You never question your country. And then I realized afterwards that my country was just absolutely a lying, it was like a gutter snipe. It just lied to achieve a result. And why would you ever want to follow anybody that did that? So, but
One
that
of
was
the great men of the century, Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay.
Yeah. And happily, he got to be appreciated for a lot of his what he gave us, and he was so entertaining. He was such a breath of fresh air. He was an ego. I mean, just like Trump is an egotist. He was an egotist, but he was competent. He was a great fighter, and
A fantastic fighter.
yeah, you didn't know it until he got up against Frazier, really. But no, he was a real good fighter. He took punishment too. And they said he had Parkinson's, but I'm not convinced that he didn't have some reaction to his.
All those headshots.
Yeah, getting pummeled. So but he was kind of light at the end. When they had him there, he would wave. I can see Billy Crystal kind of imitating. Billy Crystal's funny.
I'm ashamed of myself again, laughing at someone who was.
Should be ashamed. I was trying to be funny, so you gave me a laugh. I appreciate it. That was a gift to me.
So we have. I'd like to get back to the theory because of a moment in history in which an incredibly dangerous man is in control of the White House. Irrational, not bound by parties, an iconoclast, an individual who is certifiably, if not on paper, currently mentally ill. A number of physicians, psychiatrists have written in reference to Donald Trump that
I think
he's a megalomaniac.
His lack of stability makes everybody a little bit concerned.
Right, his lies that he will tell, his distortion of the truth, etc., etc.
The thing that's amazing to me about all this lying and this distortion is that getting caught in a lie is absolutely of no concern whatsoever.
It does not worry.
No, I mean it's kind of like he's hitting mosquitoes on the highway. The mosquitoes they just splat, and that's the end of it. He doesn't think about them after that. He doesn't have to say sorry to anybody. He just keeps telling lies. And nobody says that's enough. We can't take any more of this. It's all silliness. It's all bullshit. I mean, he's been accused of being untruthful, and he's been proven untruthful, but it doesn't diminish his lies.
So there's nothing standing in the way of him continuing to pursue his course and lies. Let's look at the theory, if we can, if I may.
Sure.
The theory that was brought up that fascism is a positive, as a conscious decision by a leadership class to protect the profitability of their financial endeavors,
Mm-hmm.
prior to the time in which it would be necessary to protect it. So it's a movement that's created.
Well, but look at Standing Rock. That's a perfect example of the fascist state rising to stop a movement that threatened their profitability, that threatened the financial returns that they wanted, that they expected.
The oil industry.
Yes, and the state of North Dakota, but they basically got to do all this stuff, and it wasn't in the public eye unless you went online. That just was horrendous stuff, and nobody got held to account. And the North Dakota police arrested reporters who showed up there, and they charged them. Well, they ended up not pursuing the charges
They
against
silenced them.
Amy. Yeah, but they did everything they could to silence them, and they brought charges against Jill Stein, who went there to protest with the Standing Rock people. So I mean, that to me was the cover kind of slipping. They had this, you know, what's behind the curtain. They had this curtain up, and somebody dropped their end of it, and you saw the fascist state was already there and was already playing its games. And I think the fascist state is who invaded Syria. We're not going after anything but the pipelines that were supposed to go through Syria. That's what I think that whole goddamn
Russian pipelines.
versus American pipelines.
Right.
There are two distinct pipelines that were all mapped out, plotted out.
Right.
One goes to someplace where the Soviets can get at it, and the other.
Baku?
I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry, but probably we could just Google it. And we had a different pipeline in view, and I think they both came from the west, and they went across Syria. But ours was going to end up in some place we can get at it easily.
It's just oil, the flow of oil.
It seems,
Money.
It seems, and also the money that's built into building a pipeline. A lot of construction money, a lot of taxes that go on that go to different constituent organizations and groups. You know, the pie was a pretty fat pie. So there were a lot of people who had their fingers in it. The governor of North Dakota became as much a fascist as anybody. They should interview, if I was a well-meaning journalist, I would interview the police who had to enforce
The governor's
the heinous
decisions.
acts. Yeah, and the decisions made by the oil company. The oil company paid for a lot of that. There were two policemen that famously left. They refused to continue. They couldn't continue with it because they couldn't justify it to themselves.
Well,
And there may have been others that also confronted with the
Interesting.
reality of brutalizing
Civilians.
well-meaning, protesters or defenders couldn't get themselves to do it because they came in like an attack force with those shields. And,
yeah.
Sickening. And this is America. And this is to Obama's everlasting shame. He allowed that to get that bad, and he talked about, well, let's let it settle down in a couple of weeks, and then we'll see when all this shit was going on. You know, I was gung ho for Obama. I didn't realize that he was such a sellout. I thought he stood up to BP really well. That first term, I thought he was pretty good, and then he seemed to lose a sense of himself. He let Hillary run amok in the State Department and never seemed to have any. And that was the first term, so I shouldn't shouldn't discount that. She only worked the first term. And that, to his everlasting shame as well, is the legacy of Hillary Clinton, the pay-for-play, the decision to allow a Russian company to have 20% of the world's uranium, stuff
Wow,
like that.
And that was a deal that Hillary Clinton made possible. Wasn't that the case?
She okayed it, and Bill Clinton went to Russia and had a $500,000 speaking engagement to a Russian bank. Pay-for-play, well, seems like a close second to it if it isn't. Bill Clinton is sort of a murky character now. Shows up with Loretta Lynch out in Arizona. He seems
So many politicians are like that, isn't that the case?
well, he seems to have put himself in a position to profit by Haiti's tragedies. The Clinton Foundation, and I think there was a woman that was basically going to bring steal children from Haitian
Oh, of course,
parents.
yeah.
Yeah, and she was part of the Clinton campaign.
Sell them on the international
Who knows?
smuggling, child
Who knows?
smuggling ring.
She was taking these. She called them orphans, and they weren't orphans. They were just children that got separated from their parents, and that was a last minute thing. And those children were going to be something unpleasant was going to happen. They weren't going to a Happy Dale orphanage. Really weird.
Paul Stephen Stone, thank you ever so much for taking part today. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for saying something about your novel. We're in your camp. We're rooting for you to
Thank you.
have an enjoyable time in finishing it.
Thank you. I'm very hopeful. I think I will. And thank you for having me. I'm going to try to get up here every 3 weeks.
Great.
Yeah.
Paul Stephen Stone, thanks for joining us here at What We Should Know, Cambridge Community Television. Good night.
My pleasure.